Wache, Tanse, Wadawalin, Hakola, Kamasta, Bonjour, hello. That's a little better. Now you just heard me use several different native languages as a greeting. And you can hear how distinct they sound from each other. In Mi'kmaq, they say Wadawalin. Out in Abenaki, they say Kwe Kwe. In my mother's language, we say Sego Skunagoa, which would mean, do you have peace? The answer would be Skunagoa, I have peace. And then if it's any other answer, then you got to sit down and talk about it and figure out what's wrong, right? In Anishinaabe, they say Anin or Bojo. In Swampy Cree, they say Wache. Out west in Plains Cree, they say Tanse. Lakotas say Hakola. Dene say Yate. So you see the different sounds. There's totally different languages there, right? So you got to remember when you're using terms like, I still use the word Indian because that's what I grew up with. Plus we still have what we call an Indian Act. And not only that, but all of our agreements and treaties, they talk about an agreement or a treaty between Canada and the Indians of Canada. It doesn't say the First Nations. So I always worry that, well, they might try and trick us where they say, well, you're no longer Indians, you're First Nations now, so this doesn't apply to you. You know, so I still use that word, but the thing to remember is it's generic. First Nations is generic. Aboriginal is generic. Indigenous is generic. There are over 53 native languages in Canada alone. See, we're all different, we're all distinct peoples. Some of us are woodland peoples. Some of us are far northern peoples. Some of us are farmers because we can farm. Some people up north, they can't farm, it's too cold and too rocky. Some people are on the prairie, some are in the mountains, some are on the coast. So all of these different peoples have different cultures, they have different ways, they have different habits, they have different languages. They have different things that are important to them, right? For us, it would be the waters, it would be the corn, the beans, the squash, the soil, those would be important to us. Other peoples, it might be the quality of the waters, it might be the wild rice beds, it might be the trees, it might be the moose, it might be the geese. See, so we all have those different needs across here. You're also going to find that there'll be little differing attitudes too. You look at this eastern part of the country, you had Champlain coming down the St. Lawrence River in the mid-1500s. So that's how long we've been in contact with them. They didn't get out west until the 1800s. And then into the mid-1800s, they finally started crossing the Rockies. See, so we've had that much more exposure, that much more longer getting used to them, learning about how they are and what they're about, as opposed to these peoples here, as opposed to these here. And you see that reflected in the agreements, you see it reflected in the treaties. See, by the time they managed to cross the Mississippi, they had started realizing how to start making those agreements and those treaties. So they started dealing with peoples out west a little bit different. Whereas here, when they first arrived, they needed us, right? You have to understand, right? Here they are washing up on the beaches. They didn't know how to live on this land. If we didn't want them here, all we would have had to do was walk back into the forest and they would have died on the beaches. They didn't know how to live here. They didn't know what was there. They didn't know how to catch the food. They didn't know how to hunt. They didn't know how to farm. So there was a different period of history that was happening. They needed us at that time. We protected them. We fed them. We healed them. They were sick when they first arrived. We used cedar tea to heal their scurvy. We used other medicines for their diseases. Then they came along in this other period where they didn't start needing us anymore. And you see where we are today. But those early days are important because that's where a lot of the beginnings started, right? And a lot of those are entrenched in the Constitution today. You have something called the two-row wampum. Does anyone know what the two-row wampum is? Well, you should. Two-row wampum was the first agreement that was made between Longhouse people and European settlers. And it's a very important one because it started serving as the groundwork for other agreements to be laid out in the future. And basically, it's a belt. It's got white wampum beads, and in the middle are 2 rows of purple wampum beads. And what that represents is the river of life. And the 2 purple rows, the one represents our canoe. And in that canoe is our languages, is our culture, our religion, our government, our songs, our dances, everything that makes us who we are is in that canoe. The other row, that represents the vessel that they came in, their boat. And the same thing is in there, their language, their culture, their government, their songs, their music, everything that made them who they are. And that river of life, those 2 rows travel up that river of life together. And it shows that they can do that. And it also shows that they travel parallel. They don't come close to each other, they don't cross each other's path. Because if they do that, they're going to start swamping the other's vessel. And then what's going to happen if they start jumping from one boat to the other? What's going to happen to the stability of that boat? So that's what that wampum belt represents. That was the first agreement that we made. It's an agreement of mutual coexistence and respect. And you guys need to know that because we still follow that. We still adhere to that. And that also affects you. That also dictates how we're supposed to respect and how we're supposed to relate and treat each other. Right? And you can see now where they talk about, well, the Indian problems are the First Nation problem. You know, or Indians are protesting over here, or the First Nations are protesting over there. And everybody's wondering, oh, what are those Indians upset about? Well, it's because they've been swamping our canoe. See? They forgot that they're not supposed to interfere with what we're doing, and vice versa. And they also forgot that they're supposed to share the resources in the land. Right? We made treaties and we made agreements to share the land. They first arrived, and we said, sure, there's plenty of room, you can live here. And we also made sure that we preserved our rights to the land. It doesn't mean we gave up our rights to live here. It means we accorded them the right to live here as well. But now we look around and we can't go here, we can't go there, we can't hunt here, we can't fish there. We can't speak our language. We can't sing our songs. We can't do our dances. You know, our children are being taken away. So what happened? You know, what started out with this great dream that we can live side by side together in a peaceful way. Instead, they started trying to impose on us. So we have to start understanding those agreements again. That's why I like this new terminology I'm hearing, we're allies. There's a difference between an ally and a subject. You see? And for us, that was those agreements. We were allies. We're supposed to work side by side. We're supposed to live. We're supposed to share, but we're not supposed to interfere with each other. Not like today. Today, you look at, we make up less than 4% of the Canadian population. But we make up over 46% of the prison population. Almost half the prisons are made up of Indian peoples. Is that profiling? Yet we make up less than 4% of the overall population. Why is that? Does that mean we're all criminals, we're all bad guys? You know, or is there something else going on there? Right? The one thing that I fear the most for when my son leaves the house to go to school every day is that he's going to get stopped by the police. No, I don't know if the police still behave the same way they did when I was a kid, but it's a very real fear for us because we know how they treat us. We know what they're thinking when they look at us when we're walking down the street. You know, so we worry about that, especially when we see that 46% of the prisons are Indian people. You look at the high rates of suicide. We have the highest rates of suicide of any other people in Canada. We have the highest infant mortality rate. We have the lowest life expectancy rate. Anishinaabe Health down at Queen and Sherburne, just last year or the year before, they put out a report that said the average lifespan of the First Nations Indian male in Toronto was 39 years old. I read that and I went, I'm 63, man. You know, I'm not supposed to be here. Our average lifespan is 39, and yet Canada's going around the world talking up human rights and condemning other countries for human rights. Meanwhile, there's third world conditions right here in their own country. Right? To me, when I think about that, I start thinking and getting mad and figuring, well, we should be the richest people in the country. You know, there shouldn't be any homeless Indian people out there. There shouldn't be any Indian kids up north living in tar paper shacks, freezing in the wintertime, or going out without clean drinking water. We're starving to death because they can't afford food. They can afford beer, but they can't afford food. That's another thing. You know, Canada subsidizes the transportation of alcohol, but it doesn't subsidize the transportation of basic foodstuffs. So you can go up north and you can buy a bottle of alcohol for just a little bit more than you would pay down here. But to buy a loaf of bread is going to cost you 5 times as much as it does down here. Why is that? Why can't they subsidize basic foodstuffs instead? To me, I call that genocide. It's a genocidal act. You know, of course, that was kind of hard to prove, but that's what it is. You know? And that's why, for me, I quit alcohol a long time ago. I was a bad guy. I'm a little different guy, you know. I didn't grow up on the reservation. I didn't go to boarding school. I was born in Toronto. I was born in Toronto in 1952. Now, we weren't citizens of this country until 1960. Imagine how many Indians were in Toronto in 1952. In 1952, it was illegal to leave the reserve without permission. In 1952, we weren't citizens of this country. In 1952, it was illegal to go to school past the age of 15 or to attend a post-secondary educational institution. It was illegal to walk down the street wearing native regalia. You could get arrested, thrown in jail. It was illegal for more than 3 Indians to gather in a public place. Of course, when they passed citizenship in 1960, they had to start changing those a little bit. But even up until 1965, Canadian tort law, or corporate law, it still read that it was illegal to make a contract with somebody under the influence of alcohol, mentally infirm, or a Canadian Indian. Right up until 1965, it still read that. It was illegal for an Indian to own business or private property. And so people look around today and they say, well, aren't those Indians educated? Well, it used to be illegal for us. You know? Somebody asked me one time, and I couldn't believe it. I was working construction. And another guy I've been working construction with for a few weeks, he turned around at lunch one day, he says, can I ask you a question? I said, depends. He says, well, he says, I was just wondering, do Indians have feelings like real people? And I wanted to get mad at him. But then I started realizing that it wasn't so much that he was stupid. He didn't know nothing about us. The only thing he knew was what he saw on the television. The only thing he knew was what he saw in those Bugs Bunny or those Popeye cartoons, or what he saw in those comic books, or what he learned singing 10 Little Indians, you know? Or what he learned by calling somebody an Indian giver, or by circling his wagons, or going on the warpath, or being the lone man on the totem pole, or getting caught red-handed. You know? And I point these things out because people don't realize how institutionalized the racism against our peoples is. It's built right into the language. Right? Some of the shows people were talking about watching. I've seen episodes of Criminal Minds. I've seen episodes of NCIS, Castle, Bones, all these different police shows and spy shows or whatever. There's always an episode where they talk about somebody going off, breaking the rules, and they say, oh, he's off the reservation, or he jumped the reservation. Well, what does that mean? Right? So you look at the attitudes out there. We've always been portrayed as the enemy, as the target, or the comic relief, or something that was in the way. And that's the one that we're still treated as. That's what we see it with the police. You know, the police don't see us as human beings yet. The police still see us as something that has to be controlled, that has to be contained, especially out west. You don't see it so much here, but travel out west. Just go up to Thunder Bay and see how Indian people are treated up there. Go to even just to Sudbury and see what happens up there. Right? You'd be surprised. There's even places, believe it or not, in Canada where they still hunt us. I know people find that hard to believe, but it happens. You don't believe me? Just look at all the missing women. You know, how many missing Indian women are out there? 4 times, 5 times the national average. But you don't see big inquiries about that. But you see one white woman go missing and they call out all the police forces to go hunting for her. We've got how many women missing? And nobody's bothered looking. Instead, the Prime Minister comes out and says, well, it's the Indians doing it to themselves. You got last, what was it, 2 years ago, I think it was, I wanted to go and look for that guy. But I watched the Justice Minister of Canada in Parliament, and he's looking at the report of missing Aboriginal women being asked for an inquiry, and he takes it and he just throws it on the floor. You know, I couldn't believe that. Well, what kind of a breach of protocol is that? You know, that was shameful. You know, how dismissive of our sisters, how dismissive of our peoples. He just throws it on the floor. It shows me what we're worth, or what they think we're worth. And then they wonder why we don't want nothing to do with them. You know? So I still today, I still say I'm not a Canadian. Right? I'm not an American. I'm a citizen of the Mohawk Nation. Canadians and Americans came from someplace else. See, we have always been here. We were here before Canada. Our nations welcomed Canadians. Our nations welcomed Americans. We gave them a home, you know, and we agreed to share the land. And so there's still a lot of peoples who understand that we are sovereign peoples. You know, I'm one of them. A lot of people they want to try and fit in the mainstream, but a lot of us we want to be able to stand on our own first. Then we can stand as equals like we're supposed to. But that's what we're looking towards. So there's a lot of things to understand about Native peoples. You know, you have to understand where they're coming from. You have to understand the cultures. You have to understand the differences across the nation. Who are you dealing with? Are you dealing with Longhouse people? Well, Haudenosaunee people were Longhouse. We're farmers. We're used to living in large houses together. We're like being around one another. You go up north, and Anishinaabe people up north are more hunters and gatherers because they couldn't farm. You know? So you have an agrarian peoples, you need about 10 square miles to feed your family. We're a hunter-gatherer people, they need 100 square miles. So that means they're going to be more spread out. They're going to be used to just being more in their little family groupings, right? This was pointed out to me when I went to Grassy Narrows during working with them on their mercury pollution issues. And they said, you know, at one time the peoples were happy. They said when they put us together on these reservations, all of a sudden they were lumping everybody in close together. And after a while we start rubbing each other the wrong way, and then friction starts, and feuds start, and fights start. Whereas before we could spread out, we were in our families, we come together at certain times, and we were happy like that. So you have to understand those differences in how peoples live, how they've developed. I started learning about that in the Southwest. Talking with this Hopi, and the Hopis are farmers. They live in villages. And that's what this one Hopi guy was joking about, this old man. He said, well, we're not happy unless we got another Hopi on either side to bump into. He said, we can't live all spread out like those Navajos. You know? So you start to see how people develop in that way. So you want to work with Native peoples, you got to be aware of those things. You know? You got to keep those kinds of issues in the back of your head when you're dealing with people. You got to understand cross-cultural differences. You know? One way to explain that, I was working with police services about some of this. I said, well, for your culture, you figure that if somebody's not looking you in the eye, that they're lying to you. They said, but for Indian people, you have to understand, we're culturally taught that to stare at someone's eyes is to challenge them. So if I'm constantly staring at your eyes, I'm challenging you. You know, it's like almost like I'm calling you out, you know? Or another way this old man said, you can steal someone's power by staring at their eyes. Or don't let someone stare at your eyes, they could steal your power. So it's not that Indian people might be lying to you, because you're going to notice that. Indian people will talk to you, and they'll be looking over here, and once in a while they'll look to see if you're listening, and they'll keep talking over here, and once in a while they'll look back again. Or they might be looking down while they're talking, and they'll look up to see if you're listening. It doesn't mean they're lying. It means they're being respectful. See? Another cross-cultural difference was I grew up in Toronto around white people, so I was always taught that, well, you got to have a good, strong, firm handshake. That proves you can be trusted. You meet traditional Indian people and you shake their hand, it's going to be, see? Just a light, gentle. See, if I go and I'm going like this, that's not very respectful. See, that's how our mind process thinks about that. You know, yeah, I'll greet you, but I'm not going to try and squeeze your hand. You know, that's going to be disrespectful. You know, you're not doing it that way. You're being respectful. So you're going to see that cultural difference. So here's this white businessman, he's going to meet this Indian traditional man, they're going to shake hands and they're going to walk away with a different attitude about each other. Which is going to be probably wrong, but see, these are, like I said, you have to start learning and understanding these things. You know, who are you dealing with? Who are you talking to? Where are they coming from? What's been their experience? Myself, I'm just a high school dropout. I quit school at the age of 15, but it doesn't mean I'm unlearned or unread. It meant that I found that their colonial wage slave training program was an impediment to the edification of my education, so I got out of there. And that's when I started learning and I quit school. That was a different story. But you're gonna meet people like that. You're gonna be maybe working with homeless people. Well, why are Indian homeless people out there? Some are out there because of bad luck. Some are out there because of mental illness or disease or addiction. But you're gonna find a whole lot of people are out there on the streets because they want to be. Right? Because for us, an Indian person decides to do that, I'd probably be out there if I wasn't still raising my son. You know? I've got a 17-year-old I'm still raising children at my age. But I'd be out there with them too, because I feel that way. For them, that's freedom. See, they don't got nobody telling them what to do. They don't have a boss. You know, they're not answerable to anybody. They're their own person. And that's the closest they can get to freedom anymore is just to be like that. And they're not even addicts, a lot of them. A lot of them don't even drink very much. Like I said, I've known a lot of them over the years. I've seen a lot of them die too. You know, but not all of them are out there because they don't want to be. A lot of them are out there. It's the only way they can feel free. You know, they like camping. So you're going to bump into that too. You know, you're going to meet Indian kids coming from broken homes, running away from foster homes. I remember back in the 80s, it seemed like every week we were meeting 2 or 3 kids that were coming through the city that were getting out of these foster homes who had been taken when they were kids. And a lot of them didn't even know what kind of Indian they were. All they knew was they were Indian. Trying to look for some semblance of their roots. You're going to be seeing that too. People that are lost like that. You know, that's how I felt growing up in this city. Because I grew up in the city, I took to the streets after I got on my own. You know, I was sticking needles on my arm at one time, my knife in people's faces. I was robbing people. I'm lucky if not dead or in jail. But I managed to quit that. Something happened that showed me this isn't what the Creator intended for me. So I managed to put that away. By the time I was 19, I quit doing this. I started when I was about 15. Then I was still drinking. But by 1974, I put this away. So I was only 22 when I managed to get rid of this one, which made me almost a social pariah. A lot of people didn't want to hang. What kind of Indian are you? You don't drink. You know, are you too good to drink with us? You know. And then I started a whole other exploration of how we internalize those negative attitudes, how we internalize those negative stereotypes. You know, basically that's all we know about. You know, because when I grew up, I didn't know nothing about being Indian. I didn't know I was an Indian until I started public school. I grew up in Toronto. Right? I started public school, then I found out I was an Indian. I found out I was an Indian because nobody would let me forget. Because then all I heard was stupid Indian or you know, you're just an Indian or lazy Indian. Then there was drunken Indian. Then there was Indian bum. Right? That's if they weren't running around you in circles going like this. I still don't know what that means. I've been to many powwows, many gatherings, many ceremonies. I've never seen our peoples do that. You know? But you see people do that all the time. Going, oh, look at the Indian. Woo, woo, woo. You know, I never understood that. But that's all I knew growing up. So they're calling me an Indian. I didn't know nothing. I grew up in Toronto. I grew up watching the same cartoons, the same movies, the same TV shows as they did. And I was saying, I'm not like that. I don't look like that. I don't dress like that. I don't talk like that. I don't behave like that. What are they talking about? So after a while, like I said, you start to internalize those negativisms, right? I became pretty withdrawn for a while. But it seemed like nothing I could do would work. So I withdrew until I got about 12, 13. Then I started realizing I could look the teachers in the eyeball. I was getting taller. Then I started getting mean. I guess that's why I started robbing people after a while. You know, I didn't like anybody. I didn't like people too much. It took me a long time after I quit to realize I was like that because I didn't even like myself. You know, all that stuff that was being put in my head, how could I like myself? I didn't have a very good opinion of myself. You know, what was being taught to me? There wasn't any truth being taught to me. I was being taught my people were drunks, they were lazy, they never contributed nothing, they never did anything. All we did was get in the way, you know. So how are we supposed to like ourselves? And then I had to start learning the truth. I met some elders who started teaching. That's when I put this away. They encouraged me. He said, you want to learn the culture, put this away. So you can pick that culture. So that's what I did. I'm a sun dancer now. I carry pipe. I conduct sweat lodges. I burn my tobacco every day. I have young people come and see me, ask me to pray for them. So I'm happy to do that. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. You know, I had to learn that, but I didn't know none of that stuff. All I knew was all that negativity. They told us our people didn't even know how to farm when they came over. And then I started realizing, well, wait a minute. 75% of all the vegetables in the world came from native people. Corn, beans, and squash. Tomatoes, potatoes, chilies, artichokes. Every single kind of bean in the world except two. Horse bean and soybean came from China. Every other kind of bean came from Indian people. Peanuts, popcorn, chewing gum, chocolate, all came from Indian people. Rubber came from Indian people in South America. Chicle came from Indian people in South America. That's where you get chewing gum from. 75% of all the vegetables in the world. Just think about corn and potatoes alone. What those did for foodstuffs in the world. Just think what tomatoes did for the culinary arts of the world. Just think what chili did for the culinary arts of the world.
What chocolate did for all of us.
And it all came from Indian people. And then I started learning over 300 medicines in a pharmacopoeia are listed as coming from Indian medicines, remedies that they learned from us, including aspirin and quinine, analgesics, even Vaseline. Our people knew how to use that oil that would seep up. Even up here, we have stories about our people from the Great Lakes traveling down to where they had that stuff and trading for it. And we would bring that up, and that would be used for our canoes. It would be used for some pottery. It would be used on baskets to make things waterproof. We would trade it with different peoples up north who would use it the same way. So I started realizing now we had trade routes all across this country. I met an old longhouse chief. He said at one time our peoples would travel all the way down to see the Mayans. They said the Mayans were the scientists. The Mayans grew food, and they had gardens that went all the way up the side of the mountain, and it went all the way down the other side. So they had all climatic conditions covered there. Our peoples could go there and say, this is where we live, this is our soil, this is our climate, this is the amount of rainfall we get. And they could say, here, this will grow there. And peoples did that from all across. So you look at all the roads and all the highways across North America. Those are built on Indian trails. There was no such thing as La Ronde and Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone and Brule and all these explorers. All they were doing was following the Indian trails that already existed there. They weren't exploring nothing, it was already laid out. We had extensive trade networks right across North America. You want proof of that too? we had an international language. A language that was understood from Alaska to South America. That was the sign language. And that's now used to give deaf-mute people a way to communicate. So we had an international language, we had international commerce, we had farming, we had medicine, we had the great law of peace, we had government. The United States took that. They adopted it into their Constitution. They had, I believe it was the Congress of Albany in 1767. There were Iroquois chiefs present there to help Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson write out the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. George Bush, I think it was in '91, issued a letter recognizing that finally, that this is where they got their inspiration from. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington used to go to Iroquois councils to see how we governed ourselves. And this is where they got their concepts of government. It didn't come from Greece, it came from our peoples. You know, Greece had they say a democracy, but Greece had slaves. That's not a democracy. The women didn't have no vote in Greece. It was only the aristocracy and the ruling class. Everybody else was a slave, so how could that be a true democracy? They never learned it there. They had to come over here and learn it. You know? So learn these things. There's a book called Indian Givers. They used to have it at the world's biggest bookstore. I don't know if they're still there, but you can probably still find it or find it online. But it's a pretty good read. It lists a lot of these contributions. It lists a lot of languages, right? I used to talk in schools, public schools. They used to like asking Indian kids, well, does anybody speak any of our languages? Anybody speak any First Nations language? And of course they all giggle because they all say no. Well, what about Canada? What about Toronto? What about Ontario? What about Toboggan? What about Tuxedo? What about OK? What about Succotash? What about Manitoba? Etc., etc. Those are all Indian words. You know? So you start learning about this stuff. Start learning about these riches. You know? What came from our peoples? You know, what did we contribute? You know? And I do a lot of this talks to a lot of Indian young people because they don't know this stuff either. But I do it to teach them. This is where the kinds of intelligences that we have. You know, we're always being told that our peoples were backwards. You know, I guess they were right, because you know what? When Columbus landed out there in the Caribbean, over here in North America, there wasn't an Indian in the country who had a job. Can you imagine that? Massive unemployment. There wasn't anybody who had a job. We had functioning social orders. We had happy children. We had thriving communities. We had medicine. We had trade networks. We had thriving trade. We had food. But nobody had a job. Try to imagine that. No bosses. No paychecks. No banks. So no taxes. No courts. No police. No prisons. No old age homes. No orphanages or other human garbage dumps. How did we do that? How did we manage to exist like that with no jobs? And they say we were backward. And now we have this. How did a planet that didn't cost anybody a penny to make get so damn expensive to live on? You know, try and figure that. So what's going on here, right? We're being told that we have to learn to assimilate, that we have to become sophisticated, we have to become civilized, we have to become progressive. Meanwhile, look what their progress is doing. They're evolving us right into extinction. You know, you just watch what's happening on the news reports about global warming and the pollution levels, what's happening to the oceans, all the dead zones in the ocean. And they can't put the correlation that it's because of all the oil that they keep dropping down there. You know, all these oil leaks that keep happening. They don't know why the oceans are dying. You know? And all this evolution keeps going on, all this progress keeps going on, until pretty soon we're not going to be able to breathe or drink. You know? My dad used to laugh about this. He said, you know, when I was a kid, if somebody would have told us we'd be buying this stuff like this, we would have laughed at it. You know, but look what we have to do now. And I don't know, anybody know where this water comes from? The Sunny? I know some of it comes from, they say France, some from glaciers or, you know. But to me, when I think about that, what am I drinking? You know, I'm not drinking from the waters around me. So I'm not connecting with the land. You know, I'm not eating food from the land around me, so I'm not connecting with the land. I'd rather be able to do that than all of this progress that's evolving us into extinction. You know? These are some of the ways that you're going to find people think. You know? And people think a little bit different. Me, I think a little bit different again because I grew up in the city. I grew up at a time when we weren't even citizens yet. People find that hard to believe. They say if you're born in this country, then you're a Canadian citizen. Well, how come I was born in St. Michael's Hospital, but I wasn't a citizen? Right? Everybody has the right to an education. Well, why didn't I have a right to an education when I was born? Right? I'd like to. I tried going back to school a couple of times, but I was too jaded to stay. You know? I did manage to get some college credits, so I went to California, and I got involved with the Native Adult Education Program, and because of stuff I knew and that, they let me teach. So I ended up down there teaching about Native culture, history, and I knew a little bit about roots and herbs and medicine, and I had taken medic training. I had been the medic on the longest walk, so I was teaching a little basic first aid as well. It was Native Adult Ed, so they let me do that. And then through that, they arranged me to take these tests, so I got my GED. And then I signed some other papers for Dennis Banks, who was chancellor of the first all fully accredited Indian university in the United States. It was a 2-year university, and I got my 2 years out of that. So that's the extent of my formal education. My credits were in community organizing, Native culture and history, cultural studies, environmental sciences, and federal Indian law. And when Dennis told me I passed all my courses, I said, well, I don't remember going into a classroom. He said, well, you've been doing the work. So it's the first time I ever got any credit for the stuff I do. So that's the extent of my formal education. Since then, I've managed to, I've given these kinds of talks at universities and colleges from UCLA to University of New Brunswick and back by a couple of different routes. So I've organized a lot of different things. In 1980, we did the Long Walk for Survival, where we retraced the path of the longest walk in '78 from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. And what we were doing was we were bringing evidence from the U.S. Government Accounting Office on the sterilization of Indian women. We had come to find out that almost half of Native women to that date had been sterilized without knowledge or informed consent. And we were taking all that information to Washington, D.C. and charging them with genocide. And then from there, we continued on to New York City to the United Nations. And we had meetings there on the same issues. This was in 1980. So this is how long I've been studying these issues and looking at these things and trying to figure out what we can do. I mentioned a few of these things just to let you know that you're not powerless. If you see something is wrong, that you can do something about it. Because all we were just a bunch of ragtag Indians with holes in our jeans, you know. But we brought attention to things. We did what we could, you know. We wouldn't have some of the things we do today if it wasn't for this activism. Like I said, when I was a kid, it was illegal for more than 3 Indians to gather in a public place. It was illegal to practice our culture, our ceremonies. And now we can have gatherings at the Native Center. We can bring pipe, we can have pipe ceremony at the Native Center now. And that's because we started standing up in the early 70s, the late 60s, and saying it's okay. You know, we're not going to let them beat us anymore. And we started bringing those things back out. Because when we started doing that, we had different occupations across the country at different times. Different marches, different rallies, you know. And every time we did that, we would bring the drum. And the pipes would come. And the feathers would come. And you got to remember, in 1970, this was only 10 years since we had been citizens. You know, and that was the climate we were coming out of. This climate of fear, this, you know, there were old men who were afraid to bring their pipes out because they thought they would get arrested. You know, people were afraid to speak their language because they didn't want to get beat. You know, and this was the climate we were coming out of. You know, and we've still got a long way to go. But these people are getting kind of antsy.
So we can, do you want to switch to a question and answer?
Yeah, want to see if people want to stretch?
Yes, let's take a couple minutes just to, in your seats or stand up and stretch.
Stretch, and then you can go ahead and ask questions of me or yell at me, or we'll start with you. But stand up and
I'm sorry if you get my hair.